And what happened when that 2013 international refugee regime was signed? How hard? Why is it so hard for the Kenyan government to implement it? Talking about repatriation, maybe looking for a settlement for the refugees here in the country, which the government has actually remained adamant, saying that refugees are a threat to the country when it comes to matters security. Now, it is a packed bulletin for you just from what I've explained this morning. My name is Brenda Zederajito. Once again, welcome to the program and to keep me company for the next 2 hours. But then, let's begin with the top story this morning, actually on matters, the closure of the Kakuma Dadaab camp. And the government has issued a 14-day ultimatum for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that is UNHCR, to close down Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps located in Kenya. In a brief statement posted on social media, the Interior Ministry actually asked UNHCR to provide a roadmap on the definite closure of the two camps that has hosted hundreds of thousands of refugees for many years. And as senior reporter Dan Kanhemba reports, the statement said there was no room for further negotiations.
HCR came out of a meeting of senior government officials in the Ministry of Interior that was chaired by CS in charge of Interior, Dr. Fred Matiang'i. Among those who attended the meeting were Chief Administrative Secretary in the Ministry Hussein Dado and Principal Secretary Dr. Karanja Kibicho. Also present were officials from UNHCR, led by its representative to Kenya, Fadhila Adala. Attempts to get more details from the government were futile, perhaps owing to the sensitivity of the matter. Dadaab refugee camp is located in Garissa County, while Kakuma is located in the expansive Turkana County. Both camps have hosted thousands of refugees. The latest move by Kenyan government threatening to kick out refugees coming days after Kenya withdrew from a case filed by Somalia at the International Court of Justice on maritime border case, where Kenya was angered by ICJ's failure to grant her request for more time to prepare for the case. Since 2015, when cases of terror attacks increased in the country, Kenya has repeatedly issued threats to close the two refugee camps, but backtracked following interventions from the international community. Reports indicate that Kenya has scheduled meetings with diplomats from countries whose citizens are refugees in the said camps in preparation for repatriation of their nationals. It remains to be seen whether the ultimatum will be implemented this time round. Duncan Hemba, KTN News.
All right, so I want us to speak to Moses Wetangula, who is the Ford Kenya party leader, but for the purposes of this conversation, we are picking his mind as the former Foreign Affairs Minister. Of course, he served between the year he served as the Foreign Affairs Minister between the year 2008 to 2010 and from 2010 to 2012. Joining us here on a KTN News Center. Good morning, Honorable Moses Wetangula.
Good morning.
So now, this is not the first time that Kenya is talking about kicking out refugees from the country. We had this conversation back in May 2016, in February 2019, the government citing about security issues. But again, now 5 years later on, and I'm talking about 5 years later on, I'm counting from 2016 to 2021, the government is still talking about the same thing, closing down the two refugee camps, Kakuma and Dadaab camps, citing the same reason they've always given. The refugees are a threat to the country.
I have reason to believe the reason you looked for me is out of a tweet I sent out in response to this issue after the Interior Minister issued the statement. If you ask, do we need to close the refugee camps? The simple answer is yes. This has been the intention of the country for years. From the time I was in Foreign Affairs as Assistant Minister, as Minister, and those who followed after me. The issue is the methodology, the convenience, and the concurrence with the international community. We have to remember that the refugees from Somalia and South Sudan, and any other country for that matter, are not hosted in Kenya on behalf of the countries from where the refugees fled from. They are hosted in Kenya on behalf of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which is a UN agency, and we are members of the UN. Now, when refugees are hosted in a country, first, it does not bestow upon them a permanent status, because a refugee is not a desirable permanency for any individual in life. Number two, refugees are perceived to be running away from danger. Some from political danger, security danger, others from simply economic difficulties. Once you host them, then they also acquire rights. The protocols of the UN that we have signed as a country bestows rights on refugees to the extent that you cannot wake up one morning for whatever reason and say they must leave. Because their rights include, one, the obligation on the host country not to drive them back to the situation where they were running away from. Because the reason we host them is because we found that it was reasonable to do so on the basis that our partners, the UNHCR and ourselves, were satisfied that the situation they were running from was real.
But then,
number two, when you want to repatriate them, you have to engage UNHCR to give them an opportunity to be relocated to willing third-party countries. You're asking something?
Yes. In fact, when you're talking about, you know, the voluntary repatriation and probably taking refugees to a third world country, you bring in an important aspect. That is the international refugee regime that was signed by Kenya, you know, in 2013 with the UNHCR.
Yes.
And part of this international refugee regime also talks about, it's good if you say the other two, the other part that it talks about, it's about giving refugee that chance to be relocated in Kenya or being allowed to stay with their relatives here in the country in case they have some of their relatives in Kenya. But it looks very hard for the government to either implement any of those international refugee regimes that we are talking about.
I don't know why it is hard. In the 60s and 70s, Mwalimu Nyerere of Tanzania, when he was president, gave an option to Burundi's refugees and Rwandese refugees in Tanzania to opt to become citizens. Many of them became citizens. Some are even members of parliament, are friends of ours. We know them. Now, Kenya should also take a leaf from that, because it can happen to Kenyans. We can also degenerate into a situation where our own people can seek asylum and become refugees in neighboring countries or elsewhere. We need to engage very carefully on humanitarian grounds, and above all, on the fact that these refugees are fellow Africans, running away from understandable situations. Of course, we have constantly said, and I agree, that giving comfort to refugees from a country that is not sorting its mess out like Somalia in a manner that is satisfactory to everybody is not and should not be encouraged to be a continuous exercise. That notwithstanding, I want to encourage the government that, one, yes, we'll support you in closing these camps, because particularly the experience we have had in Dadaab, the people who attacked the Garissa University were said to have emerged from Dadaab refugee camp, and the weapons that were used were supposed to have been harbored there. That compromises our security very seriously. But when you want to engage the international community, you have to look at both sides of the coin. Give UNHCR an opportunity to now deal with the refugees, because there's no collectivity in being a refugee. Each refugee is a refugee individually. So, do you want to apply to be absorbed in Kenya? Do you feel you can go back to your country of origin? Is the situation improved sufficiently for you to feel safe? Or do you want UNHCR to relocate you to another refugee camp in a third country? Those are options that are in the protocols that we have signed.
But then, Honorable Wetangula, let me just read the tweet. Allow me to read the tweet that you had posted yesterday on your social media account, specifically Twitter. And this is what you had to say. The intended closure of Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps is laudable. However, the two-week data line to evacuate over 500,000 refugees to countries of origin or third countries is unrealistic, unreasonable, unachievable. Perhaps 6 months will be the period that probably is needed for these refugees to go back to their country or the third countries. But then even as much, the reason as to why I'm talking about that, it brings me to the question of whether, as the former Foreign Affairs Minister, will this actually continue to strain the already strained relationship with Somalia, because most of the refugees are from Somalia, and Somalia is not stable as we speak?
Kenya's relationship with Somalia right now is not at its best for multiple facts and reasons. The maritime dispute, the infiltration by Al-Shabaab, and of course the stress caused to our economy and security by the refugees in Dadaab. But I would want to think that if we really want to repatriate these refugees, the first point of call is not Somalia, whether we are having a good relationship or strained relationship. The first point of call is the UNHCR. They are the ones who keep the data on refugees, of course shared by the host country. They are the ones who have got the preferences of the refugees, and are the ones who will advise the two governments of Kenya and Somalia that out of, say, the 270 plus refugees in Dadaab, half would want to go back to Somalia. Somalia would be obligated as a nation to accept its citizens, or sometimes it may say, we are not ready to have them. They are also got that right to do so. If they do so, then UNHCR will then go back to the refugees and say, your country is not ready to receive you. Can you go to Ethiopia where we have another camp, or Uganda where we have another camp, or Tanzania where we have another camp? Then they can be able to relocate them. I do not want to believe that an event and a program that has been on our cards from over 10 years ago it can be attributed to the stress in the relationship between Kenya and Somalia over the maritime case. That case will take a long time to be concluded, and I have said this and I want to repeat. President Uhuru Kenyatta needs, as a senior statesman in the region, to call Somalia to order, get his counterpart in Somalia, sit down and talk. We go to courts because we can't agree, but where we agree, courts become places that nobody wants to go. So we can resolve this maritime dispute. But back to the refugees. If you look at the logistics of repatriating these refugees, we have over 500,000. Just do a simple calculation and say, one, nobody is going to engage the luxury of bringing planes to lift refugees from Dadaab to Somalia. They'll have to look for buses. With the Corona challenge, a bus will carry properly 20, 30 people with social distancing. How many buses and for how long will carry 500,000 refugees either to Sudan or to Somalia? It can't be 2 weeks.
But then,
so even the Minister for Interior, when he issues those ultimatums, and I had Duncan Khaemba in his news brief saying that he was asking UNHCR to take steps. If that's what he asked, then I agree with him. But if he said lock, stock and barrel, 2 weeks, we must close Dadaab, we must close Kakuma, then that's what I call unreasonable, unrealistic, and unachievable.
Then, at the same time, the Ministry of Interior says there is no negotiation about the decision they've made. But then, Honorable Wetangula, at the heart of this matter is a conflict between Kenya's treaty obligations, because we signed international treaties when it comes to matters refugees were in the country, and the rights and obligation as a sovereign state to protect its citizens and secure its borders.
It is very easy for a minister of government to make extravagant statements like it's not negotiable. When it comes to implementation, he will realize that it's actually more negotiable than not. Because, first of all, Kenya itself does not have the resources to repatriate these refugees. We do not have the money. The economy is in a severe stress. There is no money to relocate refugees. When you relocate refugees, you are under an obligation wherever you take them to also assist them to settle down and live a decent human life. Where is the money in Kenya? It's not there. It is UNHCR that will do it. UNHCR itself has no money. It depends on support from donors like the European Union, the Japanese, and other countries, the US, and so on. So when you say 2 weeks not negotiable, you are boxing yourself into a corner. So you just count from yesterday, and 2 weeks down the line, go back to Minister Matiang'i and ask him, now 2 weeks are over. Without even negotiating, as you said, not negotiable, have the refugees gone? I can tell you without any fear of contradiction that they will still be here.
All right, so Honorable Wetangula, we need to bring this conversation to an end because I need to continue bringing Kenyans to update with what is making the headlines. Just in a minute, respond to this tweet that you tweeted yesterday where you're condemning the removal of the Senator Cleophas Malala as Senate and Deputy Minority Leader. You've termed it as selfish, unhelpful, unlawful, vindictive, intolerant, and against the NASA coalition agreement. Yet, when that decision was being made, we had it from Honorable James Orengo that this was a decision being made based on the NASA, based as NASA members of the Senate Assembly.
I'm a NASA member, I'm a NASA principal, I'm a senior ranking member of both the coalition and the Senate. I was neither invited nor did I participate in a meeting that led to that decision. The decision was pure and simple, reached upon by a team of members of the Senate from the ODM wing of NASA, which is a coalition partner. WIPA was not involved, ANC was not involved, and neither was Ford Kenya. So I can tell you that what was done was wrong, and it remains wrong, and it will remain wrong.
All right, Honorable Moses Wetangula, asante sana for joining us here on KTN News Center this morning, talking to us on, yes, he is a member of the Senate Assembly, Bungoma Senator, and also the Ford Kenya party leader, but talking to us as a capacity as a former Foreign Affairs Minister who served between 2008 and the year 2010 on that issues of the refugee. We wait to see, Honorable Moses Wetangula, actually what will happen after the 2 weeks, so that the two camps, Kakuma and Dadaab camps, will be closed as directed by the minister.
As we close off, I assure you, as we close off, 2 weeks from yesterday, those camps will still be open, and go back to the minister and ask him about non-negotiability of his ultimatum.
All right.
We want to close these camps, but let's be realistic in what we say. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Such, strong sentiments, closing part from Moses Wetangula, who's the Ford Kenya party leader. But of course, for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking to him, picking his mind as a former Foreign Affairs Minister. Asante sana for joining us here on KTN News Center this morning. But then President Uhuru Kenyatta held talks with Coast Governors Hassan Joho, Amason Kingi, and Salim Mvurya. Sources privy to the meeting told KTN News that the president read the right act to the three governors from the coastal region against forming a regional party. Kilifi Governor Amason Kingi had threatened to ditch ODM and unveil a coast region party next week, Tuesday. However, Joho